The wind tore across the desolate plains with a ferocity that made even the hardiest travelers think twice. Snow fell in thick, blinding sheets, coating the ground in a silent, ghostly white. Mira Thornfield, a woman of 30, struggled against it, her once sturdy boots now sodden and frozen. Her breaths came in ragged bursts, mist curling around her face like the spirits of some forgotten land. She had been traveling with her family, but a sudden drift, a collapsing snowbank, and the cruel bite of the storm had separated her from them. Now the world was nothing but endless white, and panic was threatening to take hold. Mira's fingers were numb, her coat barely insulating her from the relentless cold. Each step was agony. Every gust of wind seemed intent on pushing her back into the snowdrifts she had just climbed. She stumbled, falling to her knees, and pressed her face into the powdery ground, tasting snow and despair. She thought of her family, her mother, her father, and how close they had been moments ago. Were they still alive? Were they even searching for her? Or had the storm claimed them first? The day had begun with a quiet optimism. Mira had insisted on guiding her family to the ridge where the golden sun touched the snowy peaks. Her father had grumbled, but she had convinced him, pointing to the clear tracks of deer and the promise of a vantage point like none other. But the storm had come faster than anyone expected, turning the path into treacherous, unseen pitfalls. She had lost sight of her family in the blink of an eye, and then the storm swallowed everything, leaving only white nothingness. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost meaning in the storm. Mira's legs trembled, and the first pangs of true fear gripped her heart. She had survived in harsh conditions before, yes, but never like this. Never alone, with the world stripped to ice and wind, with no shelter, no warmth, no hope, but what she could conjure from sheer will. She pressed on, each step a battle, each breath a triumph. And then, in the periphery of her frozen vision, she saw something unusual, a dark figure moving against the white dot. At first, she thought it was a trick of the wind or her own mind, conjuring shapes in the storm. But no, there it was again. A shadowy figure, moving with a grace and confidence that the snow itself seemed to yield to. Mira's heart leapt, hope rising like a fragile flame. Could it be someone else lost? A traveler? A trapper? The figure came closer, and the wind revealed more of him. Tall, muscular, moving almost like he was part of the storm itself. His dark hair whipped around his face, streaked with frost, and his eyes deep, penetrating, met hers with an intensity that froze her blood in a different way than the cold ever could. He was clothed in furs, adorned with tribal jewelry that jingled softly with his steps. Mira's instinct screamed both caution and trust. "Are you lost?" she called, her voice trembling, barely audible over the wind. He stopped a few feet away, assessing her with a careful gaze. "You're in danger," he said, his voice low and calm, carrying a weight of authority and knowledge of the land that made her shiver. "You cannot survive the storm alone. Follow me." Mira hesitated. Trusting a stranger and unknown man in this wilderness felt impossible. But the storm gave her no choice. Every instinct she had screamed to follow him, and she did. Step by step, he led her to a sheltered hollow hidden by the folds of snow and rock. It was small, unassuming, but the walls shielded her from the relentless wind. Inside, he built a fire with surprising speed, his hands deft despite the cold, the flames roaring to life and casting warm amber light over their frozen forms. Mira sank to the ground, shivering, exhausted beyond comprehension. He handed her a fur blanket, and for the first time in hours, she felt warmth that wasn't just physical, but something deeper, something like hope. "I am Kael," he said, sitting opposite her, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. "You are safe for now. The storm may rage, but here you are not alone." Mira looked at him, words failing her. The storm outside continued its merciless assault, but for the first time, she felt the first fragile thread of something new, a connection, a protection, a possibility of life beyond the snow. And in that quiet, flickering firelight, Mira realized that her journey was no longer just about survival. Something larger, more mysterious had begun. The fire crackled in the hollow, sending sparks upward, only to vanish into the white tempest outside. Mira wrapped the fur blanket tighter around her shoulders, still shivering, but not from the cold alone. Her mind was a whirl of questions. Who was Kael? How did he survive the storm with such ease, moving like he belonged to the land itself? And most of all, why had fate sent him to find her when everything else seemed intent on swallowing her alive? Kael watched her silently for a moment, his dark eyes reflecting both firelight and something untold. The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. It was a quiet acknowledgment of the storm outside and the fragile trust slowly forming within the hollow walls. Finally, he spoke. "You should not have been out there alone," Kael said, his voice low and steady, yet carrying an edge of something dangerous, like the wind itself could obey him. "The snow hides death as easily as it hides life. You were lucky." Mira swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could keep up with my family. I didn't expect this." She gestured vaguely to the storm raging beyond their shelter. "I didn't expect to be alone." Kael nodded almost grimly. "Luck is a strange thing. You survived because the land allowed it and because I found you. But surviving is not the same as living. Out there, you would have been nothing but another shadow in the snow." She stared into the fire, trying to digest his words. There was a weight to them, an understanding of the wilderness that she could feel in her bones. Somehow, Kael carried a command of this land, this harsh, frozen world that was unlike anything she had ever seen. She wondered if he had always been like this or if the land itself had forged him. "You live out here?" she asked, her curiosity overcoming her fear. "Or do you move between places?" Kael tilted his head, as if considering how much to reveal. "I move where the land takes me. The storms, the rivers, the mountains, they speak. I listen. You must do the same if you want to survive here." Mira shivered, not just from the cold now, but from the intensity in his eyes. There was a mystery there, a story he wasn't telling, and she felt a strange pull toward it. Part of her wanted to know everything about him, the life he had led, the battles he had fought, the solitude he had endured. But another part whispered caution. Some stories were dangerous to know, and some people were dangerous to trust. The wind howled outside, rattling loose snow and whistling through the rocky hollow. Kael stood and walked to the entrance, peering out through the storm. Mira followed his gaze and saw the world reduced to white chaos. She shivered again, but it was not fear, it was awe. The storm was merciless, yet there was a beauty in its fury. "You need to rest," Kael said without looking at her. "The snow will not stop, and neither will the cold. You must conserve your strength. Tomorrow, we move to somewhere safer, higher ground. You cannot remain here forever." Mira nodded, letting herself sink into the fire's warmth. "Why? Are you helping me?" she asked quietly. "You didn't know me." "You didn't have to." Kael finally turned, and for a moment, the firelight revealed a glimpse of vulnerability beneath the stoic exterior. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply, "and because the land brought you to me. Some things are beyond choice. You must learn to trust that." Mira felt a strange comfort in his words. Despite the storm, despite the fear and uncertainty, there was a tether forming between them, something unspoken yet undeniable. Perhaps it was trust, or perhaps it was something more primal. A connection born of survival and shared danger. As the night deepened, Mira's eyelids grew heavy. Kael watched over her, his posture relaxed but alert, every sense tuned to the outside world. She felt the faintest hint of safety in his presence, a feeling she had not known in years. And as sleep pulled her under, the fire casting flickering shadows across the hollow walls, she allowed herself a single thought. For the first time since the storm began, she was not completely alone. And somewhere in the howling wilderness outside, Kael's eyes never left the blizzard. He had found her, yes, but fate, he knew, had a far larger plan for the woman who had wandered into the snow. Morning broke with a pale, filtered light that struggled to pierce the thick blanket of snow. Mira stirred beneath the fur blanket Kael had provided, feeling the residual warmth from the fire. Her muscles ached, her lips were chapped, and yet, for the first time in what felt like days, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Kael had already begun preparing for the day. His movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as he gathered firewood and assessed the snowdrifts outside. Mira watched him in silence. There was something about his presence and authority and strength that made her feel both safe and strangely exposed. She wanted to ask about him, about his life, but the words seemed to get lost in the cold air between them. "You'll need to eat before we leave," Kael said without looking up, producing a small pouch of dried meat and some nuts. "The snow will not wait for weakness." Mira accepted the food silently, nibbling at it with trembling fingers. "Kael." She began, but he raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "You will speak when it matters," he said quietly, eyes scanning the horizon. "Now we move. There is a hollow further up the ridge, safer from the wind and avalanche. We must reach it before the storm worsens." The journey was grueling. Each step sank into powder knee-deep, each gust threatened to knock them off balance. Kael moved with the confidence of someone who had lived all his life in this harsh land. Yet he remained attentive to Mira, adjusting her steps, warning her of hidden crevasses and shielding her from sudden gusts. Every gesture was precise, almost intimate in its care. Hours passed, and Mira's curiosity grew stronger, gnawing at her restraint. Finally, as they paused on a ridge overlooking a valley swallowed in white, she asked, her voice barely audible over the wind, "Kael, why do you live like this? Why are you out here alone?" Kael's dark eyes softened for a brief moment, and he stared at the valley below, letting the silence stretch before answering. "I am not alone," he said slowly. "I am with the land, with the rivers, with the storms. They teach, they punish, they guide. This solitude is not loneliness." Mira studied him, sensing that there was more behind his words than he let on. "And before? The land? Did you have a family? A home?" Kael's jaw tightened, and he looked away, gaze fixed on the horizon. "I had a past," he admitted finally. "A life that I cannot return to. Choices were made, paths taken. Some things are better left buried in silence." The admission hung between them, a shadow mingling with the snow around. Mira felt a connection stirring, a fragile understanding of pain, loss, and survival. She wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap between his secret and her own loneliness. But the harshness of the storm reminded her that survival came first. As they moved again, the wind grew fiercer, forcing them to hug the rocks and traverse carefully along a narrow ledge. Kael's hand brushed against hers, steadying her, and Mira felt a strange warmth at the contact. It was more than physical. It was reassurance, trust, a lifeline amid the relentless chaos of the snow. By late afternoon, they reached a natural hollow carved into the ridge. Kael immediately set to work, reinforcing it with snow-packed walls and arranging rocks to block the worst of the wind. Mira offered to help, but he gently pushed her back, insisting she rest and conserve her strength. You will need all your energy, he said. Tomorrow we move again, further up, where the storm cannot reach. As night fell, Mira sat close to the small fire, wrapped in the fur Kael had given her. She watched him carefully, noting the way he moved, the precision in every action, the quiet intensity in his gaze. There was a story buried in him, a past of pain and resilience, of battles fought and solitude endured. And she realized with a flicker of both fear and desire that she wanted to know it. Kael crouched near the entrance of the hollow, scanning the snow and listening to its whispers. The firelight flickered across his chiseled face, highlighting the strength in his body and the mystery in his dark eyes. He had saved her from the storm, yes, but it was clear that the bond forming between them was deeper than survival alone. Rest. Mira, he said finally, his voice carrying a calm authority that left no room for argument. The snow has its own plan. We only follow. Mira nodded, letting herself lean back against the warmth of the fire, feeling the cold retreat slightly from her bones. And as she drifted into a restless sleep, the hollow seemed to cocoon them, both two souls caught in the unforgiving wilderness, bound together by necessity, curiosity, and the first fragile threads of trust. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring new challenges. But tonight, for the first time since the storm began, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps survival was not just about living, but about finding something or someone worth living for. The storm had softened by dawn, leaving a crisp, fragile quiet in its wake. Snow lay thick and unbroken across the ridge, each tree and rock coated in glittering frost. Mira awoke with stiff limbs, the chill still biting through the fur, but the fire Kael had built last night still glowed faintly, keeping the worst of the cold at bay. She watched him quietly as he moved with effortless grace, checking the hollow's walls, adjusting snow-packed rocks, and scanning the landscape with a hawk-like intensity. You move as if you own this land, she said, her voice low, careful not to break the calm. You know it like no one else could. Kael glanced at her, a faint shadow of a smile crossing his rugged features. It has been my life, he said quietly. The land teaches those who listen. I have learned to listen and to survive. Mira hesitated, then pressed further. And before this, before the land, Kael, who were you? The question hung in the hollow, the air thick with unsaid words. Kael's eyes darkened, and he stared into the distance, as though weighing the wisdom of revealing secrets he had buried long ago. I was someone else, he said finally. A man of towns, of obligations, of mistakes. But this place, this wilderness, it stripped all that away. I am only who I am now. Mira studied him, sensing the weight behind the words. There was pain, yes, but also resilience, a life forged in hardship. Something about the way he carried himself told her he had survived more than any storm, more than any snow-covered ridge. She felt a strange pull toward him, a curiosity that was difficult to name. They moved cautiously, leaving the hollow to continue their climb toward higher ground. The snow crunched beneath their feet, and the wind, though less violent than before, still tugged at their clothes and hair. Kael led the way with certainty, scanning every ridge and crevasse, his presence a shield against the invisible dangers hidden beneath the snow dot. As they paused to catch their breath, Mira dared to ask again, "Did you lose someone? A family?" Kael's jaw tightened. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he removed a small, weathered necklace from beneath his furs, its pendant catching the pale sunlight. Mira's eyes followed it, sensing its significance. "It is dangerous to hold on to ghosts," he said, tucking the necklace back. "But sometimes they remind you why you keep moving forward." Mira felt a pang of empathy. She knew what it was to be alone, to have everything familiar taken away in an instant. I lost my family in the storm, she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. I thought I would never see them again. Kael's dark eyes softened, and for the first time, the barrier between them seemed to shift. You have survived, he said, his voice steady, yet carrying the weight of understanding. That is not nothing. And you are not alone now. They climbed further, the terrain growing steeper, more treacherous. The ridge narrowed, cliffs looming on either side, yet Kael moved with the ease of someone born to this world. Mira followed his lead, trusting him completely, though her heart thudded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. When they reached a plateau that overlooked the frozen valley below, Kael paused. This is safer, he said. We can make shelter here, wait for the snow to settle. From this vantage, the land tells its own story. As they set to work reinforcing the plateau, Mira caught a glimpse of Kael's movements, every gesture precise, almost ritualistic, as if the land itself demanded respect and discipline. She realized then that his past, whatever it had been, had shaped not only his skills but the man he had become. Night fell again, and the plateau glowed with the soft orange of the fire. Mira sat near the edge, wrapped in furs, staring at the stars piercing the snowy sky. Kael moved beside her, silent, his presence a comforting weight. You saved me, Mira said softly, breaking the silence. More than once. I don't know how I can ever repay you. Kael shook his head, his gaze still on the horizon. Repayment is not needed. You were lost, and I found you. That is enough. What comes next? We face together. Mira felt a warmth spread through her chest, not from the fire, but from the realization that she was no longer truly alone. The snow had brought her to Kael, and the harsh wilderness had forged a bond between them that was stronger than fear, stronger than lost. And as they sat together under the icy sky, Mira knew that this storm had not just tested her survival, it had brought her to someone who might become her family, her protector, and something far deeper than she had dared to imagine. The wind returned with a vengeance that morning, sharper and more relentless than before. Snow fell in thick curtains, obliterating the plateau's edges and turning the world into a blurred, frozen void. Mira struggled to keep her footing as Kael led the way along a narrow ridge, his muscular frame cutting through the storm like a shadow of certainty. Every step demanded concentration. Every gust threatened to sweep them into the valley below. You must keep close. Kael shouted over the roar of the blizzard, his voice calm but commanding. One misstep and the snow will not forgive you. Mira nodded, gripping his arm instinctively. There was comfort in his strength, yet fear gnawed at her. The snow had already taken so much, her family, her path, her sense of control. Now it seemed intent on testing her endurance further, on breaking her resolve. Hours passed in tense silence, punctuated only by the wind and the crunch of snow beneath their boots. Kael moved with an uncanny precision, guiding Mira around unstable snowdrifts and hidden crevasses, anticipating dangers before they appeared. His presence was a lifeline, yet she couldn't shake the sense that he carried burdens far heavier than any storm. At one point, the ridge narrowed to a jagged spine of ice and rock. Mira froze, her heart pounding. I can't, she whispered, fear strangling her words. Kael reached out, his hand steadying her. You can, he said, eyes locking onto hers with a fierce intensity. You've survived worse. Trust yourself. And trust me. His confidence bolstered her courage. Together, step by step, they crossed the perilous path. Mira's muscles ached, her lungs burned, but she felt alive in a way that only danger could inspire. And through it all, Kael never wavered, never faltered, guiding her as if their lives were entwined with the very fabric of the land. As the blizzard raged on, Mira noticed something unusual. Kael seemed almost alive with the storm, his movements fluid, his senses tuned to every shift in wind and snow. It was as though the wilderness itself obeyed him, bending subtly to his will. She felt a mix of awe and unease. How could one man hold such mastery over a world so indifferent? They finally reached a small natural cave, partially concealed by snow and ice. Kael pushed aside loose rocks, creating a temporary shelter from the fury outside. Mira collapsed inside, exhausted, shivering from more than the cold. Kael built a fire, using dry kindling he had carried in a leather pouch, and the warmth slowly seeped into her frozen limbs. "You are stronger than you know," Kael said quietly, handing her a piece of dried meat. "The storm is harsh, but it cannot break what refuses to bend." Mira chewed slowly, gathering strength. "Kael, you've survived all this alone?" she asked, her voice tinged with awe. Kael nodded, his gaze distant. "I have been tested by the land, by loss, by solitude. The snow is only one of many trials. But it teaches you if you are willing to learn. And you are learning quickly." Her eyes met his, and for the first time, she allowed herself to see the man behind the warrior, the man shaped by hardship, yet capable of deep care and protection. A bond was forming, forged not by comfort, but by shared struggle and reliance. As the night descended, the storm began to abate slightly, though the plateau remained treacherous. Mira sat close to the fire, wrapped in furs, feeling Kael's presence as a shield against the cold and the fear. "I don't know how I could have survived without you," she admitted softly. Kael's dark eyes met hers, unflinching. "You would have found a way," he said. "But I was here, and that is enough. From here, we move together. Always together." For the first time, Mira felt the weight of the storm ease, not because the wind had softened, but because she realized that survival was no longer a solitary struggle. Kael had become more than a guide. He was a companion, a protector, and perhaps something even more profound. The fire crackled between them, shadows dancing across the cave walls. Outside, the world remained harsh and indifferent, but inside, a fragile sanctuary had been forged. The storm had tested them, pushed them to the brink, but it had also brought them closer, weaving threads of trust, resilience, and unspoken understanding. And as Mira drifted into a restless yet comforting sleep, she understood that the trials of the blizzard were not just about surviving the storm, they were about discovering strength, courage, and a bond that might withstand even the fiercest winds of fate. The blizzard had finally begun to relent, leaving the world around them hushed and glistening under a fragile pale light. Snow sparkled like crushed diamonds, blanketing the plateau and stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Mira took a deep, trembling breath, feeling the sharp scent of pine and cold air fill her lungs. The storm had been merciless, yet somehow they had survived together. Kael stood at the edge of the plateau, his silhouette framed against the shimmering valley below. The muscles in his arms and shoulders flexed beneath the frost-specked skin, every movement deliberate, a natural command over the land. Mira watched him, wrapped in furs, feeling warmth and awe in equal measure. She realized in the quiet aftermath of the storm that this man was more than a savior. He was a force of nature, as mysterious as the wilderness itself. "We should move to lower ground," Kael said finally, his deep voice calm but firm. "The snow may have slowed, but the ridge remains dangerous. Hidden drifts could swallow us whole if we linger." Mira nodded, grateful for his guidance. As they descended, the snow crunched under their boots, each step an echo in the otherwise silent world. For the first time in days, Mira allowed herself to look around. The devastation of the storm was evident. The trees bowed beneath heavy snow, rocks had shifted, and the frozen landscape bore scars from the wind's wrath, but there was also beauty in its wildness. A raw purity that left her both humbled and inspired. "Kael," Mira said. Her voice soft. "Why did you choose to stay here? Why the mountains, the storms, the isolation?" Kael's eyes, dark and penetrating, met hers. "Because it is where I belong," he said simply. "The land shapes you. The storms test you. And in return, it teaches you things that no town, no people, no walls ever could. I have learned survival, yes, but also patience, respect, and trust. Things most never understand." Mira listened, absorbing the weight in his words. She had lived a life of certainty, family, town, routine, but none of it had prepared her for this. Here, in the wilderness, stripped of pretense and comfort, she had discovered resilience she didn't know she possessed, and a bond with Kael that transcended the ordinary. As they moved further down the slope, the sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the snow and illuminating the valley below. Mira felt a flicker of hope stir in her chest. Perhaps there was more than survival awaiting her. Perhaps life itself had a second chance to offer, even in the most unforgiving of places. Suddenly, Kael stopped, motioning her to crouch behind a boulder. In the valley below, faint movement caught her eye. Figures, moving with purpose, their intentions unclear. Kael's expression hardened, the calm authority in his gaze sharpening into focus. "Stay behind me," he said. "We may not be alone." Mira's heart pounded, but she obeyed instinctively. Kael descended the ridge with cat-like grace, every step calculated, every muscle tensed and ready. The figures in the valley were settlers, a small group making their way through the snow. Their approach was slow, cautious, and unaware of the plateau above them. Kael observed silently for a long moment, then returned to Mira. "They are not a threat for now," he said, "but this is a reminder. The world below still exists, and one day we must face it." Mira felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. For days the storm had been their sole adversary. Now the outside world crept back into view, reminding her that life continued and choices awaited beyond survival. They made camp in a sheltered grove, where the trees offered protection from residual winds. Kael built a fire while Mira gathered snow to melt for water. As the flames danced, Mira found herself speaking again, the words spilling out in a way they hadn't before. "Kael, I've never met anyone like you," she admitted, her voice barely above the crackle of the fire. You saved me, protected me, and yet, you are so mysterious. I feel like I want to know everything about you, but also respect the parts you hide." Kael's dark eyes softened, and he extended a hand, brushing a lock of snow-dusted hair from her face. "One day you will know," he said. "But for now, you only need to trust. Trust the land, trust yourself, and trust me. That is enough." As night fell and the stars pierced the icy sky, Mira felt a profound sense of connection not just to Kael, but to the wilderness that had tested and shaped them. She realized that the storm, harsh and unrelenting as it had been, had forged more than survival. It had forged a bond, a fragile yet undeniable foundation for the life they could build together. And in the quiet glow of the fire, she finally allowed herself to imagine a future, not one of fear and isolation, but of trust, family, and perhaps even love, born from the storm itself. Dawn broke over the frozen valley, a pale gold spilling across the pristine white snow. Mira Thornfield rose from the small fur-lined shelter Kael had built the night before, stretching her stiff limbs and blinking against the brightness. The storm was over, leaving the world silent except for the faint whisper of melting snow and the distant cry of a lone hawk. It was a morning of clarity and reckoning, a chance to move forward. Kael stood at the edge of the plateau, his dark hair whipped lightly by the soft morning wind. Muscles taut, eyes sharp, he surveyed the land with the same precision and care that had guided them through the storm. When he saw Mira emerging, he gave a subtle nod, and she felt the familiar surge of safety and trust she had come to rely on. "We moved to the valley," Kael said, his deep voice steady and resolute. "There is shelter, supplies, a chance to start again. But the path is still treacherous. You must stay close." Mira nodded without hesitation. These past days, she had learned that Kael's confidence was not arrogance, it was born of survival, experience, and an almost supernatural understanding of the land. She felt stronger with him at her side, capable of navigating dangers she never could have faced alone. The descent was slow and careful. Snow still blanketed the cliffs and hidden crevasses lurked beneath thin layers of ice. Kael moved ahead, testing each step, offering hands of guidance, and occasionally steadying her as the terrain shifted beneath their feet. Mira followed, learning to trust not just his skill, but the rhythm of his movements, the silent language he used with the wilderness dot by midday. The valley unfolded before them, a sheltered expanse of trees, a partially frozen stream, and the faint signs of wildlife returning after the storm. Kael led her toward a small cabin nestled against a copse of evergreens, smoke curling gently from the chimney. Mira's heart lifted. Civilization familiar, grounded life was within reach, yet she realized she would not be returning to her old world. Not entirely. Not after all she had endured and learned. As they approached the cabin, Kael paused. "This is where we make our new beginning," he said. His eyes met hers, intense yet tender. "The storm brought you to me, and now we decide what comes next together." Mira felt her chest tighten. The past days had forged a bond neither of them could deny. Survival had been the catalyst, but trust, respect, and something deeper had grown in its place. "Kael," she whispered, stepping closer, I want to stay with you. Not just for survival, but for something more. I don't know what it is yet, but I feel it. And I think you do too." Kael's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through his stoic exterior. "I do," he said simply. "I have lived alone for too long, endured storms and silence. But with you, I feel something I never thought I would again. Family, home, connection, and I will not let it slip away." They entered the cabin together, and Kael showed her the small, simple comforts within a hearth. Dry wood and basic provisions. It was modest, yet for Mira, it represented the promise of life reborn, a chance to build something meaningful from the remnants of the storm. Days turned to weeks. Mira and Kael worked side by side, gathering firewood, hunting, and tending to the small patch of land around the cabin. Each moment, from shared meals to quiet evenings by the fire, strengthened their bond. There were no children, no extended family, just two souls who had survived the harshest of trials and chosen to create a life together. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the snow in shades of crimson and gold, Mira stood beside Kael at the edge of the clearing. She looked into his dark, steady eyes and smiled. "We survived the storm," she said softly. "And now, we can face anything." Kael took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "Yes," he said. "Together, we are more than survivors. We are a family. Our own, forged from trust, love, and the trials we endured." Mira rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the strength of his presence. The snow sparkled around them, but no longer did it feel menacing. Instead, it glistened like a witness to their journey, a reminder of what they had endured and the life they had chosen together. And in that quiet, golden moment, Mira realized that the storm had not only tested her, but had brought her to Kael, to a bond unshakable, to a family born not from blood, but from courage, trust, and love. The wilderness had shaped them, but together they would shape the future. The sun disappeared behind the mountains, and the world fell into a calm, gentle night. But inside the cabin, and within the hearts of Mira and Kael, a new life had begun, one of hope, unity, and the enduring promise of family forged in the snow.